Hello Global Gladiators, welcome back, and we are going to be exploring one of the stretch goal characters from the original Kickstarter, Tiger Azules, or Tiger Azules, depending on where you speak your Spanish from, and that is the Tiger Blue, or Blue Tiger. His shirt's just blue, not the furry side, so, you know, it's hard to say one way or another, but he is inspired by the luchadors of Mexican Spanish culture. And he's a pretty simple guy to use. Let's take a quick look at his overview card. As you can see, he's a complexity 1 fighter, and that's because he just deals damage. Nothing too crazy about what he does. He is a bruiser. You're going to want to get him pretty close in order to fight with him, but he's got a few tricks up his sleeve, just like if he was in the ring, being able to fly off that top turnbuckle, slam into somebody, push people around, that kind of thing. So he's a fun player to use if that's the way that you want to be. If you don't want to try anything with super complicated mechanics, you're just getting your feet wet, that kind of thing, he is the ideal person to punch, kick, and slam. Let's take a look at his normal side and his basic attack. 2 dice, that's standard for everybody. 6 to flip him over to his charge side, but 22 health. Why has he got so much health? Well, if we look back at that isolating hold action, you can discard 1 defense token of your choice from each enemy engaged with you every time you attack. So that benefits from running into a stack of minions with the boss, however you want to set it up, and hitting somebody and then pulling defense away from everybody. In order to make that work, you're going to have a lot of health, and that's what he brings to the table. So that is your typical uncharged strategy, is to get as many defense tokens as you can so that you can stand up to the fight. And then once he's all charged up, the attack that he does is a little bit like a Molotov cocktail. He hits harder, you get that 1 extra dice, but the force of that impact is so much that it pushes the target, boss, minion, whatever it is, 6 spaces away. And during that 6 spaces of movement, it dissipates, if that makes sense to you in a scientific term. If it is still locked in with that potential energy and can't transfer to kinetic energy of movement, he's going to hit another object, another person, and transfer that force, which means if you're hitting somebody close by and they're close to another character and it pushes them in a straight line against somebody else, you're going to deal 6 damage to the initial target and 6 damage to everybody around them because they couldn't move. That's your best bet. Let's just show real quick what that would look like. So here we have just a regular setup. A couple characters are on the board, and there is a clean line down for Tiger Azules to punch the boss. Now, let's look very carefully at our wording here. It says that it is about retreating, and for each space it cannot retreat. So let's look in the rule book real quickly about what it says regarding retreat. All right, so first thing we should look at is page 10, where it establishes the retreat rules. And the most important thing to read here is that it's when an enemy moves away from a fighter in a straight line, single direction. And they do a little bit to clarify this. You're going to be moving directly further away from the fighter that you're engaged with. You have some options as to how you're going to decide that path, but let's make sure we're 100% clear on what that means. Page 11 gives us this handy graphic. When you're advancing, you can make some turns. That is a decision made by the players on how they're going to get there. It should take the same number of spaces, but you can make some turns when advancing. Retreating, as you can see, happens within a single direction, no turning. So no matter how you're set up, wherever you're going to go, it must be in a straight line or it stops. And when it stops, that's very important for Tiger Azules, as we say, because that space where it stops becomes blocked, and then we start dealing splash damage. Now, while there are normally 6 directions around any particular hex, I'm only going to be able to move away from Tiger Azules if I'm all along in this situation as the boss, using 3 of them. And we're going to take a look at what each one of those options means if I utilize it. From this position, we'll look at a couple other positions in a second. From our position here, we're going to do a straight punch down. Now, he's going to move the full 6 spaces, and he is going to end up near Anastasia. So Anastasia, in this instance, is our ally. So he's retreated the 6 spaces, and what we're looking for is spaces that he cannot retreat. They would suffer direct damage. While Anastasia is adjacent, she's not going to suffer any damage because all of that potential energy got used up on the hit down. Now, let's look at another option that could have happened. Maybe he did a roundhouse kick or something and it pushed him in a different direction, but it still was able to move the full 6. So the only damage he's going to be inflicted by is whatever those 3 dice rolled. And keeping in mind, grapple attack. So unless you were using something that specifically modified grapple attacks, then that's all you got. So those are the situations where it's in the clear, you're not affecting anything, and there's no potential energy stored up. Let's look at a situation from that same position that will inflict some damage. I'm going to slow this one down just a tad so you can see the path and you can count up the spaces yourself. So let's punch him. He's moving 1, 2, 3. So we're going to roll our dice, whatever they come out as, and then our potential energy was 6, but 3 of those were spent in movement, which means the damage left is going to be 3 damage done to Ah Long. There's nobody around him. What if we were to put some people there? So let's put some the golden dragons in there to go along with it. So you can still see the trail that he would have followed, and you still see the residual 3 tokens. In this circumstance, because all of these figures are adjacent and he has been stopped, all of them are going to take that same 3. So in total, your grand net is going to be 12 damage spread amongst 4 different figures. So that's pretty awesome. If you did it right next to him, what would happen? Let's see. Notice here I've set everything back except that I've moved Tiger Azules just a little bit away. So now, as we saw before, we still get to pick directions as to what away means during the retreat, and one of those paths will lead directly into Drago. So if I were to perform this attack, specifically tightly reading the exact text, it says that for each space it cannot retreat, the target and each enemy adjacent to it suffers 1 direct damage. This means I can push Ah Long into Drago. Drago will not receive any damage because he's my ally in this configuration and therefore not an enemy. And that's 6 damage that goes directly to Ah Long. And as in the previous, if there were any minions around, those minions would be affected, but any of my allies or any other fighters would not. So you can do a tag team, you can double things up, however you want to do it. In this circumstance, I could maybe do 9, 10, 11, 12, depending on how many crits pop up, damage to the boss just by punching him from within this space. That's why Tiger Azules is a 1 complexity fighter, because he's going to do massive amounts of damage. He's pretty easy to use, and he can take quite a few hits. This is just his normal attack, his charge side. We haven't even talked about his cards, so let's take a look at tactics. So first up, they are basically variations of the same thing. Claws out, hunting grounds, prime to pounce. These are tactics that are going to modify some type of damage that you're going to do right off the bat. It says here, your attacks on each one of these cards deal +1 punch damage, +1 grapple damage, +1 kick damage. If you have all 3 of these cards out, that means you are going to be doing +1 of each. So if you're going to do a regular 2 dice attack, you get that 2 dice attack with whatever type of damage you're going to be doing. And then on top of it, you're going to get 1 of each of the specific types. So this is going to take away lots of defense from anybody that he hits. It's going to break through defense like crazy. It's going to deal massive amounts of damage all the time. And it's going to happen with every attack. Now, ability cards don't always say attack, You almost never say attack. So it's just for attacks. That's from your main card or your attack cards, which we'll look at in a little bit. But there are also exhausts. So when you are next to an enemy, you're engaged with you, and it deals an amount of damage that matches the card, grapple, kick, punch, whatever it is. You can reduce that for each defense token that you have. That means that you're not going to be giving up the defense tokens. This is effectively blocking that type of attack, and that's pretty sweet. So if he's loaded up with defense tokens and you're constantly exhausting, you could possibly be invulnerable. And then you could feint if you had to gain defense tokens from each enemy in play. Again, saying that if he has a lot of enemies to fight against, he's good with crowds, then you could feint, drop a card, the same card down again, and get the defense tokens you need and attack. Yeah, it's pretty boss. So not much strategy there. Just punch things, hit things, use the exhaust as many times as you can, and just keep in mind that reduction means that you did not use your defense tokens, which may also mean, depending on how you're doing things, that you're not going to be getting power. So that's kind of the dance. How many defense tokens you have versus how much power you want. Then since his attacks are so important, let's take a look at those cards. He has Leaping Clothesline for a punch attack, Loaded Drop Kick for the kicks, and the Rolling Suplex for the grapples. He gets mobility, so he can move up to 2 spaces and attack. The way it's written, left to right, you move, then you attack. But it's saying and, maybe you could fudge it depending on how you want to do it after. Then you gain some grapple defense tokens, which is nice. Then in the Loaded Drop Kick, you retreat the target 2 spaces following all of those same rules. And it just like the charged card, if it cannot move the 2 spaces, you're going to be doing general damage. So it's a little bit less than the charged side, but very similar. And you might want to specifically use the kick for some reason if you for whatever your strategy is on the board, need to do a kick at the time. Rolling Suplex is a little bit different. So you get the normal 2 plus whatever modifiers from your tactics, and then you place the target in any adjacent space and your figure in another adjacent space, which, if you can think of the suplex, you're picking a character up and then dropping them back, and then they would have to roll away from you. So that motion of that backwards movement, if you think about it, means you're going to kind of be swapping spaces. This allows you to have really good positioning to do things, like I mentioned, to be able to get that 6 direct damage or to punch enemies into a crowd. This helps to set up that. So the turn order by which you do your attacks and you use that charge side can, if you think about it carefully, have some amazing results. And finally, we get to the abilities, Hyper Awareness, and Bestial War. You get to choose a fighter to draw a card. This can be you or anyone else. And you can repeat the effect 2 more times if you want to, meaning you get a total of 3 cards drawn. Now, when it says this effect, this does not mean that one fighter has to choose all of the cards. This means that you choose each time because that's the nature of the effect. So you can spread this around if you need to. And then you get to play an extra card. This is great. So it allows you to basically create a quick library and do an extra card attack. If you were to have done a feint off of one of your tactics and you thought that there would be one down in the deck somewhere that you could get to quickly, you would play Hyper Awareness after you did the feint and maybe be able to slap one of those back down. Or if you had one in your hand, Hyper Awareness would let you search for some attacks and then be able to, after the feint, pop the tactic back down so you don't lose out on the effect of it. Bestial Roar, you can discard a defense token of your choice from the enemy within 4 spaces of you, so it's a ranged effect. And then you may move each enemy affected 1 space. So this is, again, part of the management of the enemy positions so that you can make it more effective for yourself, especially when you're going to be doing those drop kicks and charged attacks. And then you gain one enemy for each that's affected by you. So you get power, you get energy, the roar of the crowd, whatever the case is. The scaring of your enemies from your bestial roar ends up giving that power and helping you flip. So this can really set you up to be able to, so you're going to have a distance of 4 on either side. So that's a total of a spread of 8. That's almost the entire board. You'll be able to really set yourself up for that charged attack using bestial roar. And then next up, we're going to be looking at what is Tiger like as an ally and what is he like as a rival. He gets to move 3 spaces and attack for 2. Not the most amount of attacks, but it's something. And then he gets to move the chosen enemy up to 3 spaces. They get to, each enemy engaged ends up with 1 direct damage. So it's like a mini version of his other attacks. They get to move. You get to move into people. It's not quite the same thing as if you have to count the number of spaces. It's just flat. If he hits anybody, or if the target hits anybody or lands next to anybody, then they just take 1 direct damage. So in general, maybe grand total of 3 per round, 1 of which is direct damage. Doesn't have a lot of health. I would have thought that maybe he'd have closer to 8 or 9. Just because he has so much health as a hero. But, that's fine too. What's he like as a rival? 8, again, not the most, but more than the minions that you would see. And he'll just advance, then retreat. Pretty simple. Keeping in mind, the advance rules are only when they're not engaged. Retreat is only when they are engaged also. So if for some reason he were to, as a rival, come in and hit an ally and defeat the ally, and then that went away, then he would not do the retreat. But otherwise, if he walks up to a fighter, he'll walk up, punch you, and walk back. It's only for 3. So he's not that scary as a rival, which is fine too. Just a jobber, I guess, that day. And that's when he's no longer a face. That's when he's playing heel, and that's his job, is to get knocked out by the good guy, right? So maybe that part makes sense. And that's a nutshell of what Tiger Azules is all about. If you got the stretch goals, hopefully you picked him up too. I'm not sure what the future will hold. Maybe late into the 2030s, 2040s, or whatever the case is, there will be different packages you can buy. But for right now, if you did happen to buy the Rise of the Kingdom core box during, I think it was 1 year, where the core box was being sold by Asmodee, then you might want to contact Blacklist directly to get stretch goals. So they have a website. You should check out that website. You should be following it on Facebook and YouTube and all those other places in case they have more videos, products, that kind of stuff that you might be interested in. Just a word of advice for the future people. Hello, future people. I'm going to head out of here. Please like, share, subscribe, all that kind of stuff, and share the videos. There are lots of them in 2 different worlds. One for all the first Kickstarter rules, and then the rest are on this same list for you to find all the fighters and eventually all the stages and that kind of stuff as I get around to it, along with some help with the enemies if you need it. And keep on playing. You guys have a good one.